So I am Liyah Wasson, and I am a birth doula, certified lactation counselor. I'm a doula mentor with Ujima Maternity Network, based out of Conway here in Arkansas, and which I think is where we have like similar network through in Conway because I graduated in Conway. Um, and I am He's a lot of things. I'm a mom. I'm a very dedicated mom. I'm a cloth diapering mom of three. um, and overall, I'm just a being. That's one of my favorite things to say that I am. I am just a being who's just here, doing the whole life thing in this human experience. And I just try to keep it light. I keep it fun. I keep it meaningful. And as a doula, like you mentioned, that representation matters. And so, overall, we have a lack of representation in the doula, in the birth space in general, but especially here in Arkansas. Representation definitely matters when we look at the maternal health crisis overall. We know that that's one of the things that can really make a change in what we're doing. And so Ujima Maternity Network, where I'm a member of and a mentor with, that is part of their mission, is ensuring that we have that representation within the birth space. So yes, it is really important, and it does make a difference.
Nice. So I'm really eager to learn like how you transition into the work that you're doing. Have you always been interested in it, or was there a pivotal moment in your life that led you on this path?
So I've always been really passionate about kids, working with children. Children are the future, and that was such a cliche for so long. But now I'm an adult, and I'm like, I get it. Like they're literally the future adults. Like they literally, build this future world. And now as an adult, I recognize that having healthy children, and not just healthy as in like physically healthy, but emotionally healthy, mentally healthy. It starts with having healthy households, having healthy parents. We set the example for them. My oldest is 4 years old, and he is a little sponge. And he is actually what set me on this path of birth work, because before him, I did, like when I was younger, I wanted to be a pediatrician. And then when I realized as a pediatrician, you have limited time as a doctor. So then I was like, I want to be a nurse. And I went all through school just knowing I was going to be a nurse. And then I got into college anatomy, and I was like, I don't want to do this. This is too much. And so that just kind of was what it was. And then when I got pregnant with my oldest, Leo, I had a very shifting moment with the initial OBGYN that I was seeing with him. A lot of people go into their first pregnancy, and we are very ignorant. As young people, we're not taught about like the birthing process and the pregnancy process. And even we have, like minimal sex education, but we have minimal sex education, but that's like, it's almost like they're just checking a box off the list, to be like, all right, we taught it to them, and then it is what it is. And so you go in and you're vulnerable. Pregnancy and birth is just such a vulnerable place in a woman's life, and even a man's life, really, when that partner's coming along for that ride. And the first OBGYN, I specifically picked him out because he was a Black man. I was really looking for a woman, but there weren't any women available. So I was like, okay, this is a Black man. I feel safer with that. He's, to protect me. And he had been practicing for a long time. He had really good reviews. Everybody just had nothing but good things to say about him that I read online. And then I go to him, and he was just very, it wasn't personal care. There were a couple times where I would go in for my appointments and he would forget my name, and I'm like, dude, all you had to do was read the chart, because if you don't know who I am, then if I have something specific going on with my health and you're not differentiating that between, somebody else, a different client of yours, that could be detrimental, and he was just very condescending, especially when I would talk about birthing unmedicated without epidural. This is my first one. There's a lot of fear behind that. Hollywood and just, I feel like the states altogether have done really good. It's a whole agenda that goes back years, like when the medical industrial complex system decided to even dive into the birth world. They did really good of fear mongering women out of mother-led births, out of trusting your instincts and your body, know what to do, and maybe there is some discomfort with it, but you can do it. And so he was trained within that system. And so anytime I would tell him that I wanted to birth without epidural, he had this air to him like, girl, you think you're going to do that, but that's not what you're going to do. And so I remember the last appointment where I actually went to see him, and I was pretty far along, probably 30 plus weeks. And I told him again that I planned on birthing without epidural, and he pulled me into his office, so out of the room that we had been in with my partner, and he took me into the office by himself, and he showed me this diagram of a vagina, and he was just like, well, this is where you're going to tear. This is where, it's going to hurt so bad, like just trying to scare me. And then he told me to close my eyes, and I closed my eyes, and he thunked me in my forehead. And I remember I was just so in shock. I was like, did he really just put his hands on me? And he strategically took me out of the room that I was in with my partner, isolated me in the office by himself, and I was really just stunned. I couldn't believe it. And so I go back out to the waiting room where Leo's dad was waiting for me, and he could just tell by the look on my face, he's like, what happened? And I'm like, we have to go. And he's like, what happened? And I'm like, we need to go. Like, I didn't want to tell him while we were in that space because I didn't want it to cause further problems. But right then and there, I knew two things. I knew, one, that I was not going back to see him again. Like, regardless of what I had to do, I was not going to go back and see him again. And there had been discussions before too, where I was like, I just don't think I'll be comfortable with him in the room, birthing. And even though I didn't know then all that I knew now, it was a really good example of trusting your intuition, because now that I know all the things I know now, I do realize how much that can stall the labor progress and, lead to its own like cascade of interventions and events that can really cause a traumatic birth experience. And the second thing I learned in that moment was that the system, the medical industrial complex system, is predatory, and it preys on ignorance. So it was a big race from there. And I go on and I find another provider who's willing to take me so late, and I have a pretty good birth experience. But I knew from then on, my plan, even though my plan was like, I'm not having any more kids, that's not my plan. But one wasn't even in the plan, but things happen. I knew that it was like a race for knowledge. And I was like, not only do I need to learn, but I need to make sure that whatever I learn, I pass on to others so that nobody else becomes a victim of this system, of this fear mongering, of this medical gaslighting, in a way that like you aren't capable when you are fully capable.
Thank you for sharing that. I share similar sentiments, although I am not a mother yet. I've had a negative experience with a provider that really broke my heart. It was like appalling, where it's like, I'm coming to you because I'm trusting that you have my best interest at heart. And then, like you said, the gaslighting and just, their job is to push the rhetoric and just what it is that they went to school for and what they're being paid for. That's what they have to push, the pharmaceuticals, all of that. And like you said, it is an agenda, and they feed off of our ignorance. So I'm glad that you in a like as weird as it sounds, that you got to experience that, so that you could, you know, move forward in the work that you're doing, and, you know, educating yourself and other moms. Like, it's so important, individuals like you who are, you know, sharing their testimonies, and enlightening, other women on ways to do things naturally, and the education piece is so important. So awesome. What are actually, I want to, back up a little bit. So if you could like go in detail about the work that you do. So what does that look like on a day to day? And what was like the learning curve as well?
That's a good question. I'm going to address the second part of that first, because as far as the learning curve, it's a constant learning process. We are always learning. And I feel like that's kind of what gives us, like, in a way, an advantage as doulas, is that is what we're not only passionate about, but like that's our job, to keep up with the evidence-based information, to keep up not just what's trendy or what's going to get things done the fastest, but what's going to benefit the family the most, what's going to benefit the mom the most, what's going to keep mom not just surviving, but, you know, living, and not just in terms of like, you know, mortality. That is a big part of it, but also like the postpartum period, you know, getting through like postpartum mood disorders, getting through the adjustment into motherhood. And every single time going from 1 to 3, going from 1 to 2, like it's a constant adjustment, because you just don't know until you know, right? And doing that alone is really hard, but doing that with a community, and that's what doulas strive to do. We strive to create a community. You know, I never strive to just be that mom's only support system. We're big on resources and referrals. And, you know, if you are struggling with postpartum mood disorders, I'm going to refer you to a specialist who, you know, like that is what they hone in on. I'm not trying to, like, you know, keep you all to myself and be like, well, I can do that type of thing. It's really about creating that community, and just that recognizing that these things are normal. And the more that we talk about these things, the easier it becomes to address these things, the easier it becomes to survive these things. So the learning curve is forever, because you're always learning something new. I could attend, you know, 1,000 births and still go to my 1,001st birth and learn something new. And I love that about it, because I love learning. Day-to-day doula work is interesting. So let's say like working with a client, because I do also have like a day job, and I wouldn't even say it's weird, because it really just integrates itself into your regular life, you know, like I can be working my day job, you know, processing claims, working from home, and I'm listening to, you know, like I'm having new teaching moments. I'm listening to the latest evidence on, you know, water births, or, you know, midwifery care, or whatever it might be. And that is a big part of my day to day, but it's also like just something that I love. So I don't know if I would consider that part of the doula work. Working with a client, though, it's a process of getting to know the mother. Getting to know the mother on a deeper level, a more intimate level. Hold on, I'm gonna go lay him down. 2 out of 3 of my babies are here right now, and I was like, hopefully I can get everybody to take a nap around this time.
Mothering looks so good on you. It's really like a beautiful thing to see. As someone who does not have children yet, just the way you carry, you know, your femininity and how you are nurturing your babies. Like,
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I feel like I've just now learned to really like come into that. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much. So doula work is really, if I'm working with a client, it's through the whole process, through the pregnancy, through the labor, of course, and then through part of the postpartum also. Like once you get a doula, I guess I shouldn't speak for everybody, but for myself, you create a new relationship in your life. I have doula clients who will text me, a year after their baby's born, 6 months after their baby was born, whatever it might be. And they might text me with questions. They might just text me with updates. They might text me to invite me to a birthday party. So it's a forever connection. But starting in the pregnancy, it's a very it's just creating that space with each other. Kind of like I mentioned before, I had that OB and I was like, I know I'm not going to be comfortable birthing in the room with him. And when you go to have a baby, you're in this hospital room and you have maybe created some kind of rapport with your OB, but your doctor doesn't get there until it's time for baby to come, And so you're in this space with all of these nurses who probably haven't met. And then they're rotating shifts because they can only work so long and you could be in the hospital, for however long. So you just don't have that intimacy with the staff. Whereas I could be maybe one of the only people in the room, maybe it's me and your partner or me and grandma or, whoever, but I'm one of those people in the room to ground you and remind you that this is your moment. And even though maybe all these other players are a part of it, we've created this relationship. I know what it is that you want. I know what it is that you desire. I know from what we've built before, more of what's in alignment with your spirit, what we've talked about. I like to dive a lot into your fears beforehand. What are some of the fears that you have that are going to come up, that might come up with labor? Do you have fears with the pregnancy? Do you have fears with labor? Do you have maybe sexual trauma that may come up because, that's kind of where everything's happening. And so, all of that can be a part of it. And that's a lot of what we do in the before the baby. And then we also do a lot of physical comfort measures, emotional comfort measures, maybe some breathing. I figure out how you work through pain best. You let me know how you work through pain best, and then we kind of go from there. If there is a partner or a grandma or a family member or a sister or whoever who plans on being a part of your birth experience, I like to have them at the prenatals to really do a lot of the hands-on work, because again, this is something that's really intimate, and the more intimate we can create that space, the better your experience is going to be. And then of course I'm there for the birth. So be it that timing works out properly. But I really pride myself in how I operate on giving you enough education beforehand that even if for some reason I miss the birth, maybe it's a precipitous birth, it just happens really fast. Maybe you don't call in time because you're like, I have a lot of people who are like, I just didn't want to bother you. And I'm like, no, that's literally what I'm here for. But whatever it might be, I really pride myself on, okay, even if I miss the birth, we've done enough ahead of time that you are prepared to go into this and know what you want and know what you need and advocate for yourself. And if you have a partner there, they're confident enough in themselves to, stand up for you and advocate for you. And, if you're saying, no, I don't want this, or no, stop doing this, or whatever it might be, you have that strength within yourself. And then just to get through the labor how you want. So one of my favorite birth stories to share is this client that I was working with, and this was her third baby actually. And she'd had 2 in the hospital already. And she was using the same provider that she had already gone to for this third one. And because she was comfortable with him. And as far as she felt, she'd had good experience with him. But she came to me and she was like, I want a doula because I want to try a different kind of birth. She'd had epidurals, she'd had an episiotomy with one, she'd porn with one. And her main thing was that she just didn't want to birth medicated. She wanted to try without. And I was like, beautiful. Okay, you can do it. I know you can do it. There's no question from me. So it's just giving you that confidence. And the more she's working with this OB, the same OB who she had birthed with twice already, the more she's realizing he's not going to work for this experience because this isn't the kind of birth that he's trained to do. And so she ends up last minute, I'm talking about maybe a few weeks before she's supposed to give birth, she decides to switch to a home birth. And she's a little scared, but she has confidence in herself. And her partner is scared. And he is projecting in his own ways, you know, kind of being like, you're not going to be able to do it. You know, it's going to hurt so bad. You're going to, you know, like you're not going to make it through, just all these different things. And I would tell her, you know, what he's saying is that he wouldn't be able to do it. It would hurt too bad for him. But that doesn't say anything about you, you know, because she would even tell me, she'd be like, he's saying this, he has doubts. And I'd be like, that's him though, you know, and she'd be like, but I know that I can do it. I'm like, that's all that matters, girl. You're going to show him and he's going to worship you like the goddess that you are. And so when her labor starts picking up the day of, I'm on the way and I'm coming from Jacksonville to Conway. So, you know, it's like a 45-minute drive and I'm speeding. I've got like my emergency lights on. I'm gotta get there. And before I get there, the baby does come. But I get there and she's so proud of herself. She had the baby at home. It was just her and her partner. He caught the baby. It was absolutely magnificent. And I just kept looking at her the whole time. And I was like, girl, you did it. Y'all did it. You know, like he had doubts and even he did it, you know, like y'all did this. You absolutely rocked this thing. You know, like I wanted to take a picture of them and like send it to the OB and be like, you know, like you had these doubts, but she did it, you know? And so even though I missed that birth experience and I had that small, like slight mourning period for me, missing that experience, I was really, really proud of her because she did it, you know?
That's beautiful. I really want to get into some of the terminology because I feel like some of us who aren't as knowledgeable, we may misuse words. For example, the difference between a midwife or a doula, and then just what a birth worker entails. If you could just go over some of those terms.
Yeah. So a doula, what I do, we are not medically trained at all. We only specifically do like mental, emotional, physical support. A midwife is usually, let me pull up exact definitions for this actually. So, and I already have obstetrician pulled up. So an obstetrician or an OB is a physician or a surgeon qualified to practice in obstetrics. And I like to really emphasize that surgeon part because I think that's the part that sometimes we don't realize because it's so normalized. But that's important. I'll talk more about that later. A midwife is a healthcare provider who deals with pregnancy, childbirth, and newborn care and postpartum health. And so midwives, like OBs, they handle the medical side of things. The difference between those two that I would really point out is that midwives are more holistic, more like grounded in pregnancy being as it is. And obstetricians, like I emphasized, are physicians or surgeons. And so if you have a high risk pregnancy, you definitely want to see an obstetrician and not a midwife. You know, so if you're having complications, maybe like high blood pressure, you know, maybe there are different things. There are so many things where we would say, okay, you need to see an OB, you're high risk, things that are classified as high risk, maybe in Arkansas, that may not be classified as high risk in somewhere in Europe, that would throw you into the ring with an OB, like you immediately, even if you tried to work with a midwife, the midwife would be like, well, I can't do that here. And so the doula is just kind of the support person within any of those spaces. So we kind of, what one of my mentors likes to say is that we kind of just like close that circle, close that gap between yourself and then your medical team. So the midwife or the OB, and then you have the doula who is like holding hands between both of those, yourself and the medical team, and being like, okay, let's work together, to make sure that this mom receives this best experience, and at the same time that the medical team has a really good experience also. So I know it can sound really like anti-hospital, medical industrial complex system. And although I do have my own personal reserves on that, I do recognize that they are necessary. But when we look within the hospital systems, we see nurses and doctors who are overworked. And I'm not even going to say underpaid. They're just overworked. They are overworked because hospitals are a business. And they're trying to bring in as much money as they can. And I remember being in high school and having nurses come to the school and speak with us and being like, hey, we have a nursing shortage. You all should become nurses. I remember that. And here we are over 10 years later, over a decade later, and we're still like, hey, we have a nursing shortage. You all should become nurses, And that's been like a forever thing because they're constantly trying to scrape in. It's like they're trying to push out the holistic care providers, and they're trying to scrape in whatever they can. And I work in medical insurance also. And so I see these bills and I see how it works. And I see, sometimes there are things where I might look at a diagnosis on a claim and I'm like, they should have went to a whatever, insert holistic provider here. And, they could probably really take care of this themselves even, but there's been so much fear mongering within the system that we go for every little thing. So people think just being pregnant is a reason to go see a doctor, an obstetrician, and that's not necessarily true. So a midwife and an OB are going to give two different levels of care that are necessary in their own rights. And then a doula, like I said, we're just that link. We're just that friend in the room who's going to help take some of the weight off the medical team staff and give you the comfort as the birthing person that you need.
Thanks for breaking that down. Now, I would love to know, what are some misconceptions surrounded with the work that you do?
So a lot of people do get doulas and midwives mixed up. So again, I don't do anything medical. I'm not doing cervix checks. I'm not checking blood pressure. Nothing like that. Nothing medical. I'd say that's probably the biggest misconception. I'm not a midwife. I don't deliver babies. I don't catch babies. I don't do any of that. I'm there. I'm the support person for the mom. And then there are a lot of misconceptions, I'd say right now, because it is really becoming popular and trendy. There are a lot of misconceptions on the medical side from providers that doulas are there to challenge them and make their job harder. And it's not that we're there to make their job harder, but in some ways, I would say that we are there to challenge them. Maybe just a little bit, just challenge how they've been trained and how a lot of their practices are outdated, but not in a way, we're not coming in looking for a fight, because that's not benefiting me and that's not benefiting the birthing person. More importantly, that's not benefiting the birthing person. So we're not there to make a mess of things. And with that means that we're not there to speak up for our clients. That's another big, big thing. When I've seen it a lot where people they feel like they've had negative experiences with doulas because they were under the impression that they were going to go into the room, go into this birthing space, and that their doula was going to be their voice for them. And that's not what we do. That's not how we advocate for you. Unless it was, if your life is on the line or something, and you just can't speak up for yourself, then I am there to do that. But if it's just something like, you said you don't want an epidural, and we get to the hospital and they're like, do you want the epidural? And you just look at me, I'm not going to be like, no, we don't want an epidural, because the staff is going to look at me like, girl, you're not the one in labor, this isn't up to you. And that just causes tension between me and the medical staff, because it looks like I'm speaking on your behalf. you have to speak up for yourself. So you might look at me and I might give you a little confirmation, like, you got this, or they might ask you something and you might look at me and I might be like, do you know what that means? Like, do you understand? Would you like them to give you more information? But I'm not going to speak directly to the medical staff. I'm going to speak to the patient, and I'm going to coach you through advocating for yourself.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It seems like your role is to be an advocate for the mom, empowering her to use her throat chakra to be, recognize her power and stand firm in what she wants for herself. So you're like reassuring her of her own power. How does your identity impact your work?
I'd say there is the identity of me being a Black woman. And then there is the identity of me being a woman that I feel like all kind of intertwines into this work and how I resonate with clients. Just that extra layer of comfort that I may give clients, just that congruent care of having somebody that, hey, they look like me, I can tell them more. She understands me, maybe she understands where I'm coming from. And then on the other end of that, I feel like anytime in business, when the idea of business comes up, and again, I don't feel like hospitals are something that we look at as a business, but they are absolutely a business. So when business comes up, it is a male-dominated field. A lot of OBs that you think of are going to be men. And so with that, there's kind of like this power battle, like this power struggle, when there's another woman in the room who, she thinks she knows more than me, kind of thing. And I would even say more so if it is a white man in some situations, more so if it's an older man. Just me being younger, I think sometimes even affects that, my age. So it has its pros and cons though. Since I am younger, another part of my identity, being a millennial, that means maybe I have less experience, which the way I see everything is that there are like pros and cons to it all, right? So I have less experience, which means a pro to that is that I have room to learn so much more, I have room to be open-minded to the different experiences that are coming along. But a con to that is that maybe I'm going to see more things. I have more opportunity to see things that I haven't experienced yet. And sometimes that can leave me, in a space where maybe a client is looking at me like, I need your help. And I'm like, girl, I don't know what to do either, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to figure it out, So again, talking about that community with doulas, I have a whole doula community behind me, who, if there is ever something that I don't know, I just call them and I'm like, hey girl, like, has this ever happened to you? Help me out. What should we do? And we work through it. So yeah, I think it's hard not to tie your identity into anything. But I do try to stay neutral with all experiences. I'm a Libra. So I really like, it's all about balance. It's all about, I'm constantly like, yeah, this could be good. This could be bad. This, like there's two sides to every story. There's three sides to every story. There's your side, their side, and then the truth somewhere in the middle. And so I always like carry that balance with everything.
What advice or tips do you have for expecting mothers or individuals who just want to, learn more in the field?
Hire a doula. Get a doula. Look into the resources that will support you getting a doula. There are, like, Ujima Maternity Network here in Arkansas is a resource that sometimes offers scholarships, to help mothers get a doula. A lot of doulas, this is what I really like to call heart-led work. A lot of us aren't doing this like, ooh, I'm gonna get rich, I'm gonna retire, I'm gonna buy a boat and an island and a house. Like, that's not what doula work is. And so a lot of us are doing this with our heart. And so if you come to us and you're like, I am scared, but these are what, my finances look like. Like we're more than likely going to work with you, or we're going to refer you to a doula that we know will work with you. So there are different kinds of doulas. I consider myself a community-based doula. So I lean on a lot of those resources, like scholarships to provide clients. I have a partnership with a local shelter in Little Rock, and through their program, they find grant funding to pay me so that clients can have a doula. Different things like that. Maybe a community-based doula might operate on a sliding scale, so they might, be okay with you paying a little less, and then we'll have clients on the other end of things who will pay more. Or I've had people who I've sat with and they've been like, I don't think you and I are a good match, but I love what you're doing. I love your mission. We'd love to make a donation, and things like that helps me be able to support moms across all different economical statuses. And anybody who's looking to learn, I'd say it's kind of the same thing. Find a doula, like find somebody who's already doing the work, find somebody who's already involved. A lot of doulas, I've said it a few times in this interview, we really focus on community. That's like our big thing. And that's not just with the families that are, getting ready to have a baby or who have had a baby, but that's also amongst each other. So right now, Ujima Maternity Network is getting ready to begin training doulas again. Things were kind of on pause during the pandemic. You couldn't really bring in too many people for a birth. There was a period where mothers were birthing alone, and that's really scary. They couldn't even have their partner with them. And I can't even imagine. And so right now we are getting ready to train doulas again. And so we are out here like seeking people who do want to learn. And a lot of the time I tell people, if you have that desire to be a doula, you're already a doula. You're already a doula. It's not regulated work. You don't have to have any special licensing or certifications, or really even any training. It helps. And like I said in the beginning, we're always learning. So it helps to have that community to plug into those resources. But it really is all about just trusting, and really, really having that trust that mothers can do this, that families can do this, just following your gut instinct is a lot of this work. And so I sat at the table, and there was a social worker at a meeting the other day, and she was like, I just had a client who asked me to, be in the birth room with her when she has her baby, and they were like, that's really sad because it shows, that she doesn't have support in other areas. She doesn't have anybody else to be there with her. I'm just her caseworker. But she was also like, but I don't know what to do. And I was like, girl, congratulations. Like you are now a doula officially, and you don't really have to know too much. Like you're going to know when you see that mom in pain, especially when you've been through it, but even just seeing someone in pain, you're going to try and comfort them. And then that mama's probably going to be like, don't do that. And you're going to be like, okay, what can I do to help? And really, that's a lot of what this work is. You tell me how I can help you. Okay, you don't like it when I rub your arm. What can I do? Can I, put some counter pressure on your back? That helps. Can we just move around and dance? That helps. What do you need? Let's figure it out. So just plugging into the community.
As a doula, did you have a doula in your pregnancies, or how does that work?
So with my first two, I did not. I was still very ignorant on doulas, what they were, their value. I told you about my first birth story. I definitely had no idea what a doula was then. The second time, we were planning for a different experience with a midwife. And I think that I just felt too secure in that. Because we do think of doulas and, like I said, kind of advocating for us in the hospital rooms. And I am, again, grateful for that experience. because it was a lesson that even having a doula with a midwife, you just never know how things are going to change. So even though we were planning for a home birth, we ended up in the hospital. And I did know enough that I was able to strongly advocate for myself. And because I am such a nerd about all this stuff, my husband was able to help advocate for me. And he was like my doula. He is very much so way more stern and just really strong in his power, and like, she said she doesn't want this, and that's not what we're going to do. We're not comfortable with this. I mean, there were a couple of times where I was like, down, boy. It's okay. It's okay. But I do, if I could go back, I would absolutely have a doula with that experience. And then the third time I did have a doula. So you learn more and you do better.
Were all of your births natural births? Can you kind of give me some insight there?
Yeah, so I had all 3 babies without epidural. No pain relief at all. The first baby, I will say, with Leo, I was induced. So they did give me Pitocin, which is synthetic oxytocin. And so again, with that, in the moment, I was like, I'm having a great birth experience, like compared to that first OB that I was working with. I was like, oh, this is so much better. If I could go back with the things I know now, I would not allow them to induce me. It just wasn't medically necessary. I would not have gone to the hospital so soon. It wasn't necessary. But me being a first-time mom, I was like, my water broke, I gotta get to the hospital. And I remember there was this older lady there, and in a way, she was my doula in that moment, because my water broke at work. And she was older, and she'd had, I think, 3 boys herself, and they're all adults now. So my water breaks, and she's like, oh, you're getting ready to have the baby? And I'm like, yeah, I gotta go to the hospital. And she's like, no, you don't need to go yet. She's like, come over to my house for tea. And I'm like, my water just broke, like, what do you mean come over to your house for tea? But I'm also like, okay, she's done this. I trust her, that's okay. She's saying I don't need to go right now. I feel fine. And I did. I went over to her house, and we had tea, and we just talked like my water wasn't broke, and then after a while, then I went to the hospital. And even then, I would still wait until like contractions pick up, and I was more in active labor, but I didn't, because I didn't know that. And so I was induced. I was hooked up to the IVs and all the wires and things like that. But I feel absolutely powerful that I did it without any pain medication. There was a lot of movement, which is a thing where in the hospital, they're not a fan of that. But I was the type of person, even though maybe I struggle with my throat chakra sometimes and speaking up for myself, I am the type of person where, like, once my mind is set on something, like, that's it. And so I'm laboring. I know that I'm not getting the medication, and I'm like, I was just listening to my body, so it's like, okay, I need to move. And they're like, you have to stay in bed. And I'm like, I can't. I cannot. It's making it unbearable. And contractions with Pitocin are actually way harder than just regular contractions, because it's synthetic. And so I was on the ball, I was on the toilet, I was walking around the room, and I did, one of my favorite things to do is to encourage mothers to birth in different positions. And so I did give birth on all 4s. The nurses come into the room, the baby's like crowning, and they're like, all right, get up here, lay down on the bed. I was on the ball, and they're like, lay down on the bed, they're getting the stirrups up. And I'm like, I'm not giving birth like that. And I just turn around, like, I don't even give them the option to say anything else. I just turn around, everybody's staring at my rear end. And I'm just like, this is what's comfortable for me, and I do feel like I know that it makes a big difference. But then, even though I wasn't confident in like the evidence of being like, oh, this is gonna impact my birth experience, birthing on my back versus birthing on all 4s or in an upright position, I just followed the lead of my body, and I was like, this is what I need. And I didn't push long. And having a baby in the hospital versus my last, who was a home birth, and he was an unassisted home birth. So it was just me and my husband. My middle son was like napping in the room, and we were giving birth in the bathroom. It was a completely different experience afterwards, as far as like feeling rested, feeling secure, feeling peace, feeling like it was really an intimate moment for our family, because in the hospital you have nurses who are coming and they're knocking on the door and they're, kneading on your stomach, and I do, like, I give them grace because I understand that is how they're trained, and they're trained that if we don't do this, then the mother and the baby could be at risk. Like, we need to check on them every hour after they've given birth, make sure they're not hemorrhaging, make sure they're not, everybody's good, check their vitals, do this. But also, I just had a baby. That was a lot of work, and I'm tired, and what I need to do is rest. And so having the unassisted birth with my third child, where I was at home the entire time, I was having contractions all through the night. I was timing them. They were all right. I woke up. I, clocked into work. I worked from home. Contractions were like getting more intense. And so I went from sitting in my chair to sitting on the ball to eventually I was standing up. And that's when I was just like, hey, the baby's coming soon. I think I got to go. And I call my husband and he's like, okay, I'm coming home. I'm coming home. And I run myself a bath and I'm able to just, like relax in the bath for a while. I get out and in my mind, I was going to take a nap, but I had only been awake for like 3 hours anyway. So I was pretty well rested. And so instead I turn on my music and I'm like listening to Jill Scott and I'm, cleaning the house and, I would just stop and kind of move and sway through my contractions. And my husband gets here and he's like prepping food in the kitchen, just prepping some meals that we'll have for right after we have the baby. And my water broke in the kitchen and I go like run into the bathroom. I'm like in my robe and I'm like tearing it off. I get in the bathroom and I'm totally naked. And it was very organic, I guess. And I'm like over the toilet. In my mind, it was going to be a water birth and we were going to get in the bathtub. And so he's like following behind me and he's like trying to run the bath. And then he's like, can you get in the bathtub? And I'm like, if I could have made it to the bathtub, I would be in the bathtub. But instead I'm standing over the toilet, which is my porcelain throne. Every time I have a baby, I do a lot of laboring over the toilet. There's just how your body opens up in that position, in that squatting position. And so I'm like straddling the toilet. I'm like, no, I can't make it there. Like, you need to get ready to catch this baby. I'm not getting in the tub. The baby's coming like right now. And it was really beautiful because he's like, he's watching it happen. I'm almost a little jealous because, he got to experience that from an outside perspective. He's like, I see his hair. And I'm like, okay, get ready to catch him, And maybe like 2 pushes later, our son is born into his father's arms. My husband is telling me how powerful I am, which did make me feel so much more powerful. He has to unwrap the cord from around his neck, which again is something where in a hospital, they would be like, that's really scary, your baby's in danger, type of thing. But it's actually really common. And because the baby is receiving their oxygen through the cord, having the cord wrapped around their neck isn't as serious as it can be made to seem like. It's not like us who were receiving our oxygen through our nose and our mouth. So, it's hindering our flow. But he got to do that. And then he handed the baby to me and I sat there on the toilet and, I felt so, I'm like, take a picture of me. And like, I'm, naked with the baby. And I remember like posting it on Facebook and I was like, I don't care, like what anybody thinks about maybe my body in this moment, just kind of those insecurities we carry with ourselves as human beings, being like, oh, I don't like how I look in that picture. I was like, I don't care. Like this is a badass moment. I wish somebody would be like, look at her. Like, no, admire what I've done or go on about your business, because what I just did is absolutely powerful, and it's how you got here, you know. And my favorite part of the experience was definitely the postpartum experience, and not having people knocking on the door. I had a great team of my fellow birth workers, so other doulas who did come to support me right afterwards, and they really just did like, it was just like that one check-in, and then it was like, okay, we'll be back in 24 hours to check on you again, you know, and then after that we'll check on you in a week. But we had our space as a family. I always do like this isolation period after I have a baby, and the grandparents hate it, the family hates it, because they're like, we're trying to come over and see the new baby, and I'm like, nobody gets to come over for at least 2 weeks. And so everybody hates that. But to me, it is really just an intimate experience. And I loved really being able to like hone in on that intimacy more with the home birth experience, because I didn't have all the staff who was coming in that initial, 24, 48 hours. Somebody new is on staff. I'm going to a different, I go from labor and delivery to the postpartum floor. So even the nurses that maybe I got to know, now I got to get to know new nurses, new doctors, the pediatrician in the hospital. People are knocking on the door. They're trying to sell you stuff, they're like, hey, you want some newborn photographs? And I'm like, nope, I just want to sleep. I just gave birth at 7 a.m. It's 12 o'clock. I really just like to rest. I would love if you guys would stop knocking on the door, but they don't. And so it was just so peaceful. It was blissful. I would do it 100 times again. My husband, absolutely not. He's like, no more kids, but I would do it over and over and over again.
Has he shared any like of his concerns or fears throughout the pregnancies for all of your children?
So my husband is very radical. He is ex-military. So he's worked within the government. And so he has just his own views and beliefs on anything systematic, where he's like, he's the agenda person. He's big on like the conspiracy theories and this and, things like that. And he just lacks trust. So maybe where like with my second, where we were with the midwife, and then my water broke too early for us to birth with the midwife, so we had to transition to a hospital birth. He did not like that. And that was very scary for him. And I don't think that's the term that he would use, but that is the emotion that I recognized for him. He was scared. He didn't like it. He was intimidated in some ways. Just all the interventions that they want to do, they want to give you this medicine. They want you to do things their way. They want to this, they want to that. And he's like, I don't trust that. What is that? I don't trust that. So I'd say he carried less fear through the pregnancies and more fears with the actual laboring process. And he is very much so the type who he's like, if it comes between you and the baby, I'm saving you and we can make more babies type of thing, And so he was just always kind of in this space of protection. He is my protector, and he stayed in that space. Like I said, there were a couple of times where I had to be like, down, like you're scaring them, because he doesn't recognize, especially when he's very serious, that he does have this demeanor to him that is intimidating, and usually it's because he's trying to like process and think his way through things. But I'm like, hey, when you like react really slow like that, and then you talk really slow, and you have like that tension in your voice, like people can feel that. And if I were one of these nurses, I wouldn't want to be alone in the room with you, so you have to calm down, or else they're going to make you leave the hospital, and then I'm going to be alone. So he was way, way more comfortable with the home birth experience actually than the hospital, which isn't what I see often working with families. If the home birth experience is new to them, then like I told you about that other story with that client, her partner was very afraid that, again, he was very protective. I recognized that. He was very protective of her. He was like, what happens if, she can't do it? What happens if, she's hurting too much? What happens if she tears? What happens if, and it was always her. What happens with her? I just want to make sure she's safe. So I do recognize that, even though sometimes the fear can come off as something else. With the men, it's always like, I want to protect my woman. What can I do to protect my woman? I want to make sure that she's okay.
I can imagine that the home birthing process for your husband was a lot more like he felt more connected with the, what's happening, like more in control. You don't have to worry about who to trust because it's literally just you and him and your children. So that's beautiful to hear y'all's home birth story. Really, all of your birth stories. Really nice. Thank you for sharing that. So what are some of your biggest takeaways from your own journey, and as a mother, as a doula, and just everything that you do? So what are some of your biggest takeaways?
Knowledge is power. I can't emphasize that enough. Knowledge is power, and trust is power. Trusting yourself, trusting your instincts. And that's with birth, that's with motherhood, that's with just being. Sometimes it's easy to get caught up in what everybody else is doing. Everybody else is birthing in a hospital, so why would I birth at home? That's weird. Everybody else is, maybe putting their kids in public schools, so why would I homeschool my child? That's different. Or everybody else is, like I said, I cloth diaper, so everybody else is using regular diapers, and I know people still use cloth diapers. Why would I do that? That's different. But just trusting your instincts and trusting that what works best for you is what works best for you. Like there is no singular experience that we can all have in anything. That's just going to be a one size fits all. So even with home birth or unmedicated births or seeing a midwife, or doing an unassisted birth, like, although I'm a heavy advocate for those things, I recognize that is not a one size fits all experience. There are absolutely families who need to go see an obstetrician. There are absolutely times when a C-section is medically necessary. There are absolutely times when going and seeing a doctor and receiving some kind of medication is necessary. But just recognizing that when you have that uneasiness in your spirit with anything, maybe you're in a room where you just feel uncomfortable, in a place where you feel uncomfortable, whatever it might be. When you build that trust in yourself, then you learn to listen to the messages in the world around you that are going to like affirm what it is that you're feeling. Because sometimes you might have an uneasiness, and I can speak for myself. I've done enough coaching and training to know that sometimes I might have an uneasiness, and maybe it's a bias that I have. Maybe it's some trauma that I've been working on digging up that now I can recognize and be like, maybe I'm feeling this way because of XYZ, from when I was 7 with my mom or something like that, but because I have enough trust in myself, I can trust myself to listen to myself and recognize that, so just, and the more you learn too, that's another, I feel like, good example of how knowledge is power. When I learn about myself, then I build better trust in myself.
Okay, that was all the questions that I have for you. If you have anything that you want to share that we maybe did not cover, please take the time to do so.
I'd say I have 2 things. One thing that I always like to emphasize is just that men are a really important part of this conversation. Sometimes when we hear about birth or birth-related activities, we always focus on the women. And that's a new shift, because I feel like before it was always a focus on the baby. But men are a really important part of this conversation also. And they need to get into this conversation beforehand, not after something's happened to somebody that they love, because that's a lot of the times what happens, And then I'd say, this is kind of more general, not just to birth work, but I feel like entrepreneurship right now is very trendy, right? And we're all like, build a business and work for yourself. And although like I love the encouragement and like the intent behind it, I would say do things you love because you love them and not always with the intention of, oh, I can monetize off of this. Because it's hurting our passions, it's hurting our spirits to fall into that capitalist system, you know, and take the things that we love and that we're passionate about and that are maybe more organic with our hearts. And now we're trying to force it into something that was made up. Money is not real. Money is not real. Money is made up. It is fake. It is, in my opinion, a social experiment. And so now that we're kind of drifting into this whole like, that's what you have to do for freedom, we're really putting new chains on ourselves that are like shiny and gold and they look nice and maybe they got diamonds in them, but we have a new kind of shackle on us. So, you know, find things that you love and do it just because you love it.
That was powerful. I receive it. But thank you again, Liyah, for taking the time to sit down with me and share your story. It really does mean a lot to me that we got to, create this space. I look forward to seeing all the amazing work that you will continue to do, and I hope to connect with you more in the future. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I really do.
I'll definitely be in touch whenever I, edit and put this all together. Keep in mind, I am a one-woman platform, so I'm doing it all by myself. So it takes time, but I am so grateful, and I will keep you updated.
Yes, I'm honored to be here. So take your time whenever it comes out. If it never came out, I'm just honored that you thought of me to bring me into your space. Thank you so much.
So you have a great rest of your day, and we'll be in touch.
All right, bye.